We added 3 more people.
They are. Welcome everyone, and thank you all for attending and participating in Eastern Iowa Community Colleges Forum titled Breathing While Black. Our Diversity Council has been working hard to make this happen, and we are so excited that it's finally here. The idea to host this event was sparked after the murder of George Floyd. Our goal of today's event is to focus our discussion on racial injustice and bring awareness by discussing ways to overcome it. We also want to inspire unity, hope, and activism by walking away with a list of action items promoting ways to accomplish racial justice. The first step to racial justice is to talk about it openly and honestly, which we are going to do today. However, this can be challenging, and it's important to know that being uncomfortable isn't always a bad thing, especially if you're used to feeling comfortable. Part of our goal is to create a space in which we can express and listen to each other's lived experiences. I'd like to identify suggestions on how we can create this space. Number 1, listen deeply. Allow others to learn what you already know. Accept one another's reality. Don't assume intentions. Speak from your own experiences instead of generalizing. Take risk, lean into and explore any discomfort. And lastly, maintain confidentiality. Take the stories, but leave the names. And now it is my honor to introduce our panelists, starting with Dr. J.Q. Adams, retired professor at Western Illinois University and founder and director of ACE Consulting. Dr. J.Q. is one of our moderators, along with Dr. Tracy Davis, professor and CSP program coordinator at Western Illinois University. We also have Milton Shaw, who is a longstanding EICC board member. We also have Deputy Adrian Jones, Scott County Sheriff's Department. Valerie Garr, Diversity and Coordinator of Supplemental Instruction and Tutoring for the University of Iowa. And lastly, Duane Hodges, Community Activist. Before we get started, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Brandy Poston, who will walk us through today's event and how it'll move forward.
Again, thank you all for joining us. We will begin the forum by asking each panelist to respond to the prompt that we proposed first, asking them when they hear the words breathing while black, they will describe what that means to them. After the panelists have shared their individual perspectives, we will watch the chat areas for hands if you would like to speak and ask a question or share a story. And we will also watch the chat area for questions. As the conversation goes on, please feel free to pose any questions throughout, and we will watch that. The moderators, J.Q. Adams and Tracy Davis, will also be watching. So please make sure that this is a conversation. We want to make sure that there's a give and take. Let's get started.
Well, first thing I want to do is thank Brittany and Brandy for all their hard work in organizing us. And it's a pleasure to be with you today. I mean, I got to tell you, sitting at home during these times and not, in my head rather than communicating with folks, it's a pleasure to get a chance to talk about the topic we're going to talk about today. Most white folks won't tell you that they want to talk, they can't wait to talk about race. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I would have been so nervous I wouldn't have showed up to this meeting today. Today, now that I see that my liberation is caught up with every human being on the planet, and some of the myths that I've been sold, I can't wait to have conversations with other human beings who are interested in interrogating the same thing. Not the least of which my close friend and colleague, Dr. J.Q. Adams, who I owe a great debt of insight. He's put a lot of time into me, and I owe him a lot. So Dr. Adams and I would love to have, I'll let him speak for himself, but would love to have an interactive discussion, as Brittany and Brandy mentioned, an authentic discussion where we're talking about our lived experiences and then how we approach some of the questions we have. So, Dr. Adams?
Yeah, I think we ought to get started. So I'm interested in hearing from our panelists. You already have the question, but I'll read it once again. And I think we were limited to what, 4 minutes? I think we agreed to, I think that was it, 3 to 4 minutes. So please try to observe that the best you can. And I know that's probably going to be difficult for all of us. Okay, so. All right, so our question is, what does it mean to you to breathe while Black? And anybody who wants to jump on that first is welcome to get us started. So what does it mean to you to breathe while Black?
I'm going to jump in.
Thank you.
It's a simple question, and yet it's a very complex question. So for me, the only way that I can answer is I had to first think about the positive part of that answer and the negative part. So I'm going to start with the positive. And for me, it means understanding that I'm a resilient legacy of ancestors who were enslaved, certainly in their body, but free in their mind and spirit. And that's a legacy that I take very seriously. It's a legacy that I don't hide. It's a legacy that fuels me to speak my truth and to continue to have open dialogues about racism and doing anti-racism work. It spurs me to live my life and to honor the countless number of sacrifices that my enslaved ancestors who've gone before me have done just for me to be where I'm at today, especially knowing that they survived living in a country that systemically has tried to eradicate every aspect of who they are. So that's the positive piece of it, that while the rest of the world may look at my Blackness as an issue and a problem, I see it every day in all of our different colors as strength, as something to be proud of, knowing that we have overcome in many ways. Still have more overcoming to do, but we've overcome. And now we get to the negative aspect of answering that question. And again, I think of it in terms of not only what's happened to me, I could tell stories all day long about individual things that have happened to me, but I want to speak from a systemic standpoint. I work in healthcare, I work in college of nursing. Systemically, African Americans and people of color are at the bottom of every list when it comes to healthcare inequities. Banking, I used to be in banking many years ago. Redlining is still happening in terms of housing. Education, school districts, poor school districts get less funding in many respects than districts that are wealthier. Systemically, we are still at the bottom and still striving for equity. So that's what it means, breathing Black. In a country, by the way, that I love.
Thank you very much. Who would like to follow up?
Well, I'll go next.
Thanks, Milton.
Yeah, and I can really appreciate Valerie's historical perspective. But, you know, honestly, for me, breathing while Black has always been work for me. I grew up in the 60s as a child in a small southern town. And so realizing I was aware of racial differences and was aware of the discriminatory practices. But in the South, you know, it was one of those, it was like a culture. So it was a mindset, and you had to adjust to certain situations. And it created a wherewithal where you knew you always wanted to strive to be better. So let's fast forward now in today's in today's environment. I will tell you that Breathing While Black is still work. I look at it from a perspective of things have changed since the 60s, but I have to still be aware of my surroundings. I have to still adjust to certain situations. You know, for example, you know, when I was a teenager, you know, if I got pulled over, you know, I was hoping that I didn't get a ticket. You know, so now my mindset is if I get pulled over, you know, I'm hoping that, you know, the officer is respectful, and I have to make sure that my cell phone is close by just in case, and I don't want it to be mistaken for a weapon. So it's a mindset that you have to deal with. For example, I know that, you know, if I dress down like I'm in my work clothes when I'm going out shopping, I'm going to be treated differently as if I was dressed in business attire or business casual. But that's just the reality. So I think that it's a challenge, but I think that you know, we've come a long way, but we still have to be aware that there's still differences, there's still discriminatory practices, and there's still a race issue. And how we go about addressing that is what we have to do as a society. But I will tell you that I am hopeful, because I can recall, and you know, my daughter is like 30, 31 years old. And I look at her generation and I look at my generation, and, you know, and working for a company where we had to have diversity training. And I look at my daughter's generation where diversity is just like an afterthought. It's not even an issue. So I am hopeful, you know, with the generations to come that things will get better, but, you know, we still have to work.
Thank you, Milton. And we've got a couple more folks here. So who wants to step up?
So I can go ahead and go.
Thank you.
For me, and I can appreciate both Valerie and Milton's, your perspectives as it relates to kind of the historic aspect growing up in the South. I just recently got some information about a lot of family members that I didn't even know of in the South, and I started talking to them, and they were telling me about how they grew up and things that they've experienced growing up. But when we look at this question as it relates to, I look at it, you know, breathing while Black in 2020, I live in fear. That's one of the things that scares me more than anything, because when I look at the age of some of these individuals that are being killed in broad daylight in front of people with witnesses, I look at myself. I look at, that could be me. That could be me that they're sitting on my neck. That could be me that they shoot in the back 7 times, you know? So it really is something that fear that's associated with it, because I talk to a lot of different people on all different types of fronts. When you talk about, you know, people from different races, different backgrounds, different demographic backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds. And it's tough because you see so much of the hurt that's happening in our country right now. And for me, breathing while Black, it's hard. You know, I come from a background where I lived in Chicago the majority of my life, and then we moved to Iowa. So of course, the culture shock of coming from Chicago, where the predominant, my neighborhood was predominantly Black, and then coming to Iowa, where you see people of all different colors and all these different things, and again, experiencing racism firsthand coming to Iowa. So coming here and breathing while Black, when we're looking at it right now in this context, I'm just really, again, it's living in this fear that I can't even walk down the street without, because of the complexity of the political side of things and everything that's going on. There's so many friends with growing up in Iowa. I matriculated through high school in Iowa, so a lot of my friends were white. and honestly, I'm seeing a whole nother side with all that's going on because of so many of the things that's being pushed by agendas. You know, so many false narratives that's been put out there, and it's really frustrating me because as a black man who felt, I'll be honest, I got good white friends. You know, they're so awesome. But then I see that other side to them that come out that they support certain things and they can't understand the movement of what's going on right now. And that makes it very difficult for me. But like, I'm not like with social media, it's so hard to take that really serious at times. But when you see people and they post things and I try not to get into the Facebook war with people and social media war with people, but it's so hard when you see somebody say something and then there's no factual information to it. It's just based on what somebody has said and told them to believe. It makes it hard for me to sit back in this country as a black man trying to make it in this world and just do the things that I need to do to be a better man, to be a better father, to be a better friend. But on top of that, still living in fear. And that is a very hard dynamic for me. And I'm just, listening and ready to hear more about everything that everyone has to say, but, just to kind of engage in this and continue to be a part. But I want to get out of that fear. I want to not live in fear. I want to be able to walk upright and hold my head up high and say I've done things the right way and I've done things according to how they're supposed to be done.
Thanks very much, Duane. Adrian, are you ready?
Sure. Well, again, first of all, thank you for allowing me to be here and have the privilege to speak to you all. There's so many things to be said here in a short amount of time, just that fast for things I was hearing, and they're all great points. But for me, breathing while black. Let me just give you a little bit of backdrop here. Like I said, I was born and raised Southern California to a multicultural family. Like my dad was straight out of Compton, and my mom had some Hispanic, or we can say Puerto Rican and white. So growing up, I've seen different aspects of many different cultures, and good and bad in all of them. But to say breathing while black, there's so much to be said in that aspect. I'm not trying to piggyback on Hodges, I believe his name.
Duane, yeah.
Duane, okay. I'm sure he can vouch for that when I say, not to jump into the biblical aspect of it, but we all, for those who understand, in the book of Genesis, where God said he blew the breath of life into Adam, that word in Hebrew is pneuma, which means life. And so as human beings, blacks, whites, Mexicans, any race that is out here, I mean, we're all living and breathing. And so even every race has their adversities. Every race has their struggles. Every race has their challenges. So I'm trying to figure out the right wording here. So every race has challenges, and so one of the things I believe that breathing while black is us as a culture. For me, for example, it's almost like we have to come out with something to prove out the gate, because over, like Miss Valerie said, over the years, good and bad, there's been things that have been carried, we have carried with us. And so even as a young man, like I said, if I'm walking to a store or to a job interview, like I said, if I dress different, years ago, back in 2005, I had braids. I had long hair, braids, and I was still doing youth ministry back then as well. But just by looking at me, you would think, that I was a hoodlum, until I spoke. And then once I spoke, it was a different perspective. But, breathing while black, it means that, to me, it means that there's much to be we have much to prove, and some of it's just like credit. You know how we have your credit. You look at credit history. I can walk into a bank today and apply for a loan or whatever the case I'm trying to do at the bank. But based upon my credit, based upon my history, you know, they're going to make a judgment and say, okay, this is what we're going to give you, or you a high risk, or you not high risk. But that doesn't say that, again, I'm never going to pay any payment of anything. I can just be my past, I could have been totally financially ignorant or uneducated and not know. But the moment I walked to the door, I could have been a whole different person. I could have said, you know what, I took the time to read some books. I took the time to understand about compound interest. I took time to financially educate myself and walk in the door as a totally different human being. But when I walk in the door and sit down, they don't see that until I talk to them. But all they go by is what has been on my history. It was been on my credit history. I'm just kind of paraphrasing here. But again, breathing while black, it says a whole lot. I'm kind of veering off here for a second because I like the portion of it where it said, breathing while black, song of a caged bird. The part I wanted to get to right there was the caged bird. Because I believe that says a whole lot too, and not with physical, you know, cages or restraints, but I believe that especially as a Black culture, we have built so many chains mentally that because I believe as a person thinks, you know, so is he. So a lot of times I think we have these bondage mentalities, which she said earlier about being at the bottom of the system. So breathing while black, I believe it takes a lot for us to break out of that.
Thank you, Adrian. And turn to my colleague there, Tracy Davis.
Well, JQ, I want to say something real quickly. I don't breathe while black, right? But I breathe as a human being, and I breathe. I was reading this, I just bought this book called Breath. And you would think that breath is the simplest thing we do. Like we just do it involuntarily.
Mm.
I've found a lot of parallels between breath and what I've learned about how race is constructed in this country to position certain people as benefiting and others as being targeted for oppression. And one of the things that I've learned is that you breathe in through your nose. And if you just do that for a moment, like just take a deep breath through your nose and tell me you don't feel a little bit differently than you did a few minutes ago. What I try to do is focus on that breath to remember how I'm positioned in the world, and not just based on race, not just based on gender and sex, but a whole host of characteristics that we tend to other people on. And I got to tell you, I've participated in that system and have no interest in it. I'm going to be conscious of it, and I'm going to breathe in, and I'm going to use my whole, you know, sinus cavities and, you know, get all that stuff going and realize that I'm not just going to be a mouth breather, breathing in what I've been sold by the system in the past. Because I got to tell you, breathing everything in is a lovely place to be. Now, I won't say it's easy. It's hard. This is it takes some hard work. You know, I'm reminded of, we've mentioned some biblical passages, and I'm reminded of one of Jesus's, I think it's in the New Testament, about it's hard for a wealthy person to get to heaven as the camel through the eye of a needle. I think it's as hard for white folks, speaking to what Duane said about, you know, everybody's friendly until, you know, you have to, white folks have to confront race. And all of a sudden, they slip into the white system that's been sold. And all of a sudden, stop remembering that there's a whole sales system going on, and there are other ways of being in the world. And so when I start listening to that, when I start reading, my gosh, just look at history. You don't even need to get into the difficult critical concepts. You just look at history, the history that's not taught in our high school, the history that's lived by every person on our panel today. The stories you have are not the same stories I have. And why we all don't know that is a shame. Dr. Adams, yes, thanks for Sarah for putting that up. It's James Nestor's breath book. JQ.
Yeah, I love to listen because we learn so much from that act, and when we can listen, you know, without making judgments and without doing all that mental stuff that we do, which is more about, you know, us than it is about, you know, anyone else, we begin to hear better, okay, and we begin to be able to make the connections we need to make to find the humanity into each other. So, you know, so as I listened and reflected on each of you and the stories that you were telling, and I think about, you know, what our prompt was, you know, to respond to that question of, you know, breathing while Black, it immediately makes me do that reflective piece where I've got to talk about, you know, construction. I have to think about construction. And immediately when we say Black, you almost invariably have to say white. You know, Wilkerson says there can be no whiteness without Blackness, in a powerful book called Afro-Pessimism. And so that binary that we create when we invent the mirage, because that's what we're talking about. Race doesn't exist in a variant form. There's one race here. There's only been one race here. We ain't been here long enough to have the variety folks would like to think we have. What we see is an illusion of difference. It's all about proximity and how long you've been in a certain space and time, how much sun you got, okay? If you really want to get back down to it, all right? If you're around those glaciers, you're inside a lot. You lose the melanin, your eyes change color, your hair changes and stuff. Folks, we're talking about forces here that have nothing to do with what we think makes us different. And so we also have to then think about the language of race, okay? Because who drives the narrative? Who's saying this is the correct story? So, you know, when we begin to examine hegemony, you know, who's telling the master narrative, we have to be very careful. I've been reading a lot of Audre Lorde lately, and she always kind of like grabs you by the heart, squeezes it, and makes you remember, you know, difficult things. And so I've been really thinking about, you know, the statement she made about you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. And so we have to invariably be very careful when we use language. I am proud of my Blackness, but I'm not proud of it as a binary to whiteness. I'm far more proud of my connection to the diaspora from Mother Africa. And our science clearly tells us, and I'm talking about do yourself a favor, take a DNA test, and you will find that you got a 1 drop. Now, in Louisiana with a 1 drop, let me tell you, okay? I'm sorry, you know, it's your rules. I didn't make these rules up, okay? All right, but 1 drop will get you qualified as being something that many people are fleeing from, okay? And so we have to be really careful with the language we use and how we use it and what that says about our identity. You know, what does it say about, what do we see when we look in the mirror? And what does that reflection say back to us? And if it's not saying back to you that you're a human being, that you are a beautiful human being, you know, unique among all the flowers on the planet, right? Okay. And we've got to get back to that original gaze of seeing each other with human eyes. Not with colored eyes, not with ethnic eyes, not with that. And I'm not talking about colorblindness, so don't even try to go there with me because I hurt your feelings. I'm talking about that Adam and Eve stuff, and you can talk about it from any other cultural perspective you want to, but I'm talking about being human with each other, being brothers and sisters to each other.
That's right.
That makes me think a lot though about where are we at in this country in terms of our moral compass? Because in order for us to get to where you're talking about, we need to get back to realizing where our moral compass is.
Yes.
And our moral